Hi, my name is Nature Richard, and I am the ELA Curriculum Liaison, and I will be presenting Looking and Designing Our Curriculum Through an Equity Lens. So, the ELA curriculum cycle really started in depth last year. And last year, our focus was on developing a standards based curriculum and making sure that we addressed and understood all of the components that are a part of a standards based curriculum. These are also important components as I move forward when we begin to look at the indicators and evidence, which are our essential questions, big ideas, guiding questions, learning targets, learning activities, formative, summative, and performance based assessments. So then that pivoted into year number two. And after we had a better understanding of how we were framing our standards based curriculum and what that process looks like, we then started to look at our resources and text that we use for each unit and realizing that we needed to incorporate more diverse texts and looking through our curriculum through an equity lens. So, what did we begin to do? Looking through that equity lens this year, we had to begin to identify and select diverse anchor texts and resources that would expose students to a group of diverse authors, characters, identities, and cultures. So that led to a natural shift, which is looking at the anchor text and the resources again. So using what we knew of the framework of the curriculum, having writing assessments, and then now taking a deeper look this year at those anchor texts and resources and how we identify diverse texts through that. So what do those indicators look like? So there are 5 indicators. And the 2 indicators that we are using this year. So this year, our focus is on 2 indicators. A, centers the lives of students who have been marginalized and makes all students aware of the larger world community. And the second indicator we used was indicator C, which includes resources that are culturally relevant to students, which is making sure that we identify the organizing centers, which frames our curriculum, and then making sure that our essential question, our big idea, guiding questions, and discussion questions not only engage students in an inquiry process around equity-related issues, but it also required our students to begin to think critically about the treatment and history of people who have been marginalized. And then what those learning experiences look like for students both in and outside of the classroom. How do we begin to include stories that are representative of different cultures, races, ethnicities, religions, disability statuses, classes, and genders? So this year, which is when we start to take that big deep dive into our texts and resources, we looked at it through 2 different perspectives, which is how are the texts themselves and the characters representative of the different cultures, races, ethnicities, religions, disability statuses, classes, and genders? And then how do the authors that are writing these texts and resources, how are their stories reflective of different cultures, races, ethnicities, religions, disability statuses, classes, and genders? So we're looking at those 2 components as we move forward. So first, our department had to participate in a DEI professional development. And why did we feel we needed that professional development? Because as we began to assess and look at the text, literature, and resources within a unit that either we already are using or that we want to use, we realized that we all might be in different places in our cultural competency and also in our understanding of what DEI means. So defining diversity, equity, and inclusion was important, and then making sure that there was an understanding as an educator of our own cultural competency. So our design team participated in a deep identity work to recognize how stereotypes and single story narratives exist in our curriculum and what can be done to change them. So that was the first step in our first session. And then in our second session, we began to develop our own cultural competency so that we can see students' cultural and experiential backgrounds are deliberately and intentionally incorporated into the curriculum. So when I talk about the DEI lens, it's important also to know that New York State has come out the education department with a culturally responsive sustaining education framework. The CRSE framework will begin and continue to support how we look at curriculum, professional development, and there are 4 principles that we will continue to work through within our curriculum. So with that understanding of what DEI is and how it is supported and will be continued within our district, and how that is going to support the curriculum process. Again, I just wanted to review how we're using those indicators of success and evidence with the scorecard. So, with our understanding of DEI and our culturally responsive scorecard, this has now become a resource that we are continuing to use to explore and assess our texts and resources through a lens of diverse character and author representation. So we are designing and revising a unit through the equity indicators. The indicator that I began to highlight throughout this unit is how are we centering the lives of students who have been marginalized and making all students aware of a larger world community. So this unit develops themes around prejudice, and the essential questions, guiding questions, and discussion questions really require students to begin to think critically about the treatment and history of people who have been marginalized. Our standards and learning activities are designed for students to think critically about, in this unit, to what extent is freedom of the mind distinct from freedom of the body? How have human beings responded to prejudice? How can education be a symbol of freedom? When is it right to fight back? And with this, they use the diverse author and text narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass. So this unit essential question is, how can experiencing prejudice propel someone to take action? And our goal is to have students walk away with an understanding that stories have enduring power because they tell about important and interesting events, people, and places. They have themes that help readers understand and often empower people, and they use powerful language and powerful images. Students continue to understand that human beings respond to situations such as prejudice by taking action. So we used that scorecard to launch our conversation. That was our first step. It helped us facilitate a deeper conversation about where we are in our units now. And then, as you saw in the unit that I just presented, it really gave us a better understanding of how can we represent diverse characters and authors through literature and text within our units. And our design team needs to really focus on identifying and adding literature and text that meet indicators A and C. So, as we wrap up this presentation, moving forward and planning for year number 3 next year, we are now setting goals and continuing the process that I've just expressed and communicated, but through a very defined equity lens. We will continue to work with BOCES in developing a DEI professional development with an English language arts lens, continuing to use the resource with our training of the culturally responsive curriculum scorecard, and then hopefully by the end of next year, moving forward to having a Southampton Public Schools culturally responsive curriculum scorecard that defines our philosophy and reflects our philosophy of both curriculum and DEI at Southampton Public Schools. So thank you for joining me in looking at the English language arts curriculum through a DEI lens.